The man who disappeared twice. Prologue, the voice on the tape. It began quietly. A package arrived at my PO box in Pittsburgh, just an ordinary envelope, no return address, and a single cassette tape inside. The envelope looked aged, its edges worn and fragile, as if it had been sitting in some forgotten corner for years. When I opened it, I found nothing but a note scrawled in a hurried hand, Harper's Ferry, 1976. He walked into silence. I didn't know what to make of it. The date, 1976, meant nothing to me. Harper's Ferry. I'd heard of it, of course, a small, historic town nestled along the Potomac River, known for its Civil War history and its picturesque beauty. But what did it have to do with me? I slid the tape into the player, the hum of static filling the room. At first, there was nothing but white noise, a crackling air that seemed to stretch on forever. But then, a voice emerged from the static. It was low, hoarse, and ragged, like someone speaking from the depths of time itself. I didn't want them to find me, the voice rasped. But they did. Twice. The words hit me like a hammer. I didn't understand them, but something inside me felt drawn to the mystery. Who was this person? What did they mean by they? And why had I received this tape? Before I could think further, the voice spoke again. If you're listening, I'm already gone. But I'll tell you this, it wasn't my choice. Not the first time. Not the second. The tape went silent. That was all. Nothing more. Just those few chilling words, hanging in the air like a forgotten whisper. I knew right then that I couldn't just let this go. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't some obscure piece of fiction. There was something real here. And I needed to know what it was. Chapter 1, The First Disappearance. The year was 1976. Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, was a quiet town, peaceful, unassuming, with rolling hills and a few thousand residents who lived simple lives. It wasn't a place that drew much attention. Most people came to visit for its history, the Civil War battlefields, the riverside trails, and the charming old buildings. But on the night of June 14, 1976, something happened in that town that would change everything. Raymond Miller, a mechanic who ran Barlow's Auto Repair, disappeared without a trace. It wasn't as though Raymond was a stranger. He was a fixture in Harper's Ferry. A hard-working man, a husband, and father of one young son, Caleb. He had worked at the garage for over a decade, always punctual, always reliable. In fact, he had worked a full day that Saturday, just as he did every week. He clocked out at exactly 7:03 p.m., waved goodbye to Rick, the young mechanic working the night shift, and drove off in his old, beat-up truck. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But by 8 p.m., Raymond Miller was gone. Vanished. At first, no one thought much of it. People assumed he'd gone to the bar or out for a late dinner. He wasn't the type to announce his plans, after all. But when his truck was discovered, abandoned on the side of the road, that's when the unease began to grow. A teenager riding his bike home from a friend's house saw the truck first. The headlights were on, the engine still running, and the driver's side door was wide open. There was no sign of Raymond. The truck was parked in an area that was barely used, just outside of town where the roads curved and the woods grew dense. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign of Raymond's personal belongings being disturbed. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. The sheriff's office was notified immediately. They started searching the area right away. They checked the surrounding woods, the river, even the nearby roads. Nothing. No tire tracks. No footprints. No signs that anyone had been there. As the days turned into weeks, the situation only became more baffling. Raymond Miller, a man who had lived in the town for years, had simply disappeared. His wife, Emily, was devastated. She couldn't understand why he would leave. They had no history of major issues, no financial problems, no threats on his life. Everything seemed normal. And yet, he was gone. The sheriff's office conducted an exhaustive investigation. They questioned his family, his friends, his co-workers. But no one could offer a plausible explanation. His truck had been found in the middle of nowhere, as though he had been picked up or perhaps followed by someone. But there were no witnesses. The case went cold, and as the weeks wore on, the town of Harper's Ferry slowly moved on. Chapter 2, The Search That Led Nowhere. Months passed. The sheriff's office had no new leads. The only thing they could do was follow up on old rumors. Some people swore they had seen Raymond at a diner in Charlestown. Others said they had spotted him at a truck stop down Route 9. But when the authorities checked these leads, they found nothing. The town, once alive with questions and gossip, began to settle back into its usual rhythm. Emily Miller was left to pick up the pieces of her life. She moved into a small apartment in Charleston with her son Caleb, who was too young to understand why his father had disappeared, or why they had to leave everything behind. Emily tried to continue on, but she couldn't escape the haunting image of her husband's last day, his empty truck sitting in the middle of nowhere. Then, one day, nearly a year after Raymond's disappearance, Emily received a letter. Chapter 3, The Return. The letter was postmarked from Billings, Montana. There was no return address, only a brief message written in Raymond's handwriting: "I'm sorry. I'm not the man you knew. I can't explain. But I'll come back. I swear it." Emily was beside herself with disbelief. She tried to contact the sheriff's office, but they had no idea where the letter had come from or why Raymond would be in Montana. The search, which had been inactive for months, reignited. But the authorities couldn't find Raymond Miller. They didn't know where to look. And just as suddenly as the search began, it ended again. It wasn't until 1999, 23 years after his disappearance, that the story took another strange turn. But by then, the mystery of Raymond Miller had become something more than just a local case. It had become something legendary. Chapter 4, The Silent Witnesses. In 1999, the town of Harper's Ferry had changed. It wasn't the sleepy little town it had once been, but a tourist attraction, bustling with visitors who came to admire the historical landmarks. The local businesses had grown, and new residents had moved in, bringing with them fresh faces and new stories. But for the older residents, those who had lived through Raymond's disappearance, the case still haunted them. On the 23rd anniversary of his vanishing, a peculiar thing happened. A local historian, someone who had made it his mission to catalog the area's strange and obscure stories, uncovered a set of old diaries. These diaries, hidden in an old, dusty cabinet in the town's historical society building, contained cryptic entries about strange occurrences in Harper's Ferry, stretching back as far as 1930. One entry, in particular, caught the historian's attention. November 22, 1932, another one of them has come. A man, looking just like Raymond Miller, walked down the main street today. He said his name was Miller, but his eyes were too cold. He didn't belong here. Not anymore. The historian was baffled. What could this mean? Was it a coincidence? Was there any connection between the strange figure described in 1932 and Raymond's disappearance in 1976? But as he combed through the other entries, he found something more disturbing. In the summer of 1954, a similar case was recorded. A man, again described as looking like Raymond, appeared in the town and spoke of being lost. This man, too, had disappeared, leaving no trace behind. Now, the historian's curiosity was piqued. He decided to investigate further, using the information in the diaries as his guide. What he uncovered was nothing short of chilling. There were reports of people vanishing at different points throughout Harper's Ferry's history. Some were found, but most, like Raymond, never returned. And yet, there were rumors among the older townsfolk that these disappearances weren't truly disappearances at all. They were something else. Chapter 5, A New Witness. It was during this investigation that the historian found an unexpected ally, an elderly man named Thomas, who had been living in Harper's Ferry for most of his life. He was one of the few remaining residents who remembered Raymond Miller well. Thomas had worked with Raymond at the auto repair shop in the 1970s, and though he was getting on in years, he still remembered the man's last moments clearly. One afternoon, Thomas approached the historian and, after much persuasion, agreed to speak. What he revealed shocked the historian. "I knew Raymond," Thomas said, his voice shaky but determined. "He wasn't the first, you know. He wasn't the first to vanish. I don't know what's happening, but something is pulling people away. People like Raymond, they don't just leave. They're taken. And it happens in cycles." The historian listened intently as Thomas continued. "Years ago, a strange man came to town. He looked just like Raymond, tall, dark hair, same build. He was here for a few days, asking questions about people who had disappeared. The locals didn't trust him, but I remember him clearly. He left before we could ask him anything, but I remember his eyes. They were too calm. He was searching for something." Thomas paused, his expression darkening. The man left, and shortly after, Raymond disappeared. But here's the thing: after Raymond went missing, that man came back. He showed up a few years later, looking for Raymond. He asked questions about him, talked to everyone who knew him. And then, just like Raymond, he disappeared again. The historian felt a chill run down his spine. It was as though the puzzle pieces were beginning to fit together, but the picture they formed was more unsettling than he could have imagined. The disappearing men, the strange figures, the odd cycles, they all seemed to be connected. But how? Chapter 6, The Secret Beneath Harper's Ferry. As Thomas shared more stories, the historian realized that there was something beneath the surface of Harper's Ferry, a hidden history, something the town's official records had never mentioned. There was a pattern, a repeating cycle of disappearances that seemed to span generations. But what was the cause? Was it a curse? A secret society? Or something far darker? The historian began to dig deeper, seeking out the oldest records he could find. One night, in the dusty basement of the town's historical society, he uncovered a ledger, an old book filled with cryptic names and dates. It was not a ledger for any ordinary historical events. No, this was something far more ominous. The ledger contained a list of names, all of them residents of Harper's Ferry. But there was one strange detail: beside each name was a date, often years after their death or disappearance. And the names were crossed out, followed by a new name written in a different, unfamiliar hand. The historian's heart raced as he scanned the entries. The names, all of them, were connected to mysterious disappearances, going back centuries. And in almost every case, the person who replaced them was someone with an uncanny resemblance to the original. But it wasn't just the physical resemblance. These new individuals were often found in the town shortly before the next disappearance occurred. It was as though they were waiting for something. Or someone. Chapter 7, The Return of Raymond. In the year 2000, nearly 24 years after Raymond Miller's initial disappearance, a man walked into Harper's Ferry. He had the same build, the same dark hair, and the same quiet demeanor that Raymond had once had. His name was Raymond Miller. But it wasn't the same Raymond. Not exactly. The townsfolk didn't recognize him at first. But when he approached the old auto shop, people started to notice something familiar about him. And when he spoke, his voice sounded like Raymond's, but also, somehow, not. It was softer, more distant, as though it carried the weight of years spent far away from the town. Raymond, this new Raymond, didn't remember much. He didn't even seem to recognize his own wife, Emily, when she came to meet him. She had remarried by then, and her son Caleb was already an adult. But Raymond, this new version of Raymond, had no recollection of his past life, no memory of his family, or his disappearance. The townspeople were stunned. Was this the same man who had vanished so many years ago? And if so, what had happened to him? Why had he returned, and what had he experienced during his years away? But the more questions they asked, the fewer answers they received. Raymond couldn't or wouldn't tell them what had happened to him. He simply smiled faintly, as if lost in a memory that he couldn't quite grasp. And just like that, the town of Harper's Ferry had another mystery on its hands. Chapter 8, The Mystery Deepens. In the months that followed Raymond's unexpected return, Harper's Ferry became a place of whispers. People who had once felt the weight of his disappearance now watched him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The questions that had remained unanswered for over 2 decades now felt more urgent than ever. Emily, Raymond's wife, tried her best to care for him, but there was something about the man who returned to her that didn't feel like the man she had once loved. He was distant, often lost in thought, as though he were searching for something just beyond his reach. His memories were fragmented, like pieces of a broken puzzle that refused to come together. He would often disappear for hours, wandering the streets of Harper's Ferry, sometimes walking up to the old hill where the Miller house had once stood, his gaze fixed on the ruins as though it held the key to his past. Emily would ask him where he had been, but his answers were always vague. He couldn't explain what drew him to certain places, nor could he articulate why he felt so empty. Yet, there was something else, something darker. The townspeople had begun to notice that people in the town seemed to be disappearing again. It wasn't as many as it had been in the years before, but there were odd, unsettling instances. A local woman named Ruth, who had lived in the town her whole life, went missing one morning. Her neighbors reported hearing strange noises from her house the night before, but no one had thought much of it. Ruth had been known to have a few eccentricities, but no one expected her to just vanish. Then there was Thomas, the elderly man who had helped the historian. He, too, disappeared. No one saw him leave his house, and no signs of a struggle were found. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. Each disappearance seemed to coincide with Raymond's strange behavior, and people began to wonder if the two were somehow connected. Was Raymond part of the cause? Had he been the harbinger of this new wave of vanishings? Emily began to feel uneasy. She noticed that Raymond's demeanor had shifted, becoming more withdrawn, more distant. She caught him staring at the old mill just outside of town, his face a mask of confusion. When she asked him what he was thinking about, he simply replied, "I don't know, something is calling me." Chapter 9, The Secrets of the Past. As the town became gripped by fear, the historian, whose research had started all this, dug deeper into the old records. He began to connect the dots between Raymond's disappearance, the strange events in the town, and the cryptic diary entries he had found earlier. It became clear that there was something much older and darker at play in Harper's Ferry, something that had been buried for generations. He discovered that the town had once been the site of a secret society, a group of individuals who believed in immortality through the transfer of souls. According to the old records, the society had performed strange rituals, attempting to prolong life by transferring their essence into new bodies. These rituals were believed to be tied to the mysterious disappearances that had plagued the town for centuries. The historian found mention of an ancient artifact, hidden deep within the town's surrounding forests. This artifact, he learned, was said to be the key to the society's dark practices. It was a stone tablet, covered in symbols that no one had been able to decipher. The townspeople had long since forgotten the tablet's existence, but the historian's research revealed that it had been hidden for a reason. He also found a chilling connection. The artifact was tied to a cycle, a pattern that repeated itself every few decades. Each time someone vanished, It was as if the artifact was reactivated, calling forth the next participant in the cycle of soul transference. As the historian delved deeper into the origins of this strange ritual, he discovered that Raymond Miller's disappearance wasn't the first. There were others people who had vanished before him, each one leaving behind someone who looked just like them, as if they had been replaced. The historian's blood ran cold as he realized that the people of Harper's Ferry were not simply vanishing, they were being replaced by something else. Chapter 10, The Arrival of the Stranger. It was on a foggy evening in early spring when a stranger arrived in Harper's Ferry. He was tall, with dark, piercing eyes that seemed to see through everything. His clothes were old-fashioned, the kind that made people in town take a second glance. He didn't say much when he arrived, simply asking questions about the town's history and its people. He didn't seem interested in anything modern. Instead, his focus was on the older parts of town, the ones that had been long abandoned. The historian, still piecing together the mystery, met with the stranger in the local diner. The man introduced himself as Elias. He spoke in calm, measured tones, but there was something unsettling about him, something that put the historian on edge. "I've been following a trail," Elias said, his eyes narrowing as he glanced over the old town. "A trail that leads me here. This town, Harper's Ferry, holds the answers I've been searching for." The historian asked him what he was searching for, but Elias only smiled mysteriously. He didn't reveal his true intentions, but there was an underlying urgency in his words. "I know what has happened here," Elias continued, his voice almost a whisper. "I know about the disappearances. I know about the cycle. I've been tracing it for years. And I think it's time to end it." The historian couldn't shake the feeling that this man had come for more than just answers. He had come for something far darker. Chapter 11, The Confrontation. As Elias's presence in Harper's Ferry became more pronounced, the town grew more uneasy. The disappearances continued, and it seemed as though the cycle was beginning again. The historian knew he had to act fast. If Elias had any connection to the strange events that had been unfolding, then he might be the key to understanding what had really happened to Raymond and to the other missing people. One evening, the historian followed Elias through the woods outside of town. He had heard rumors that the old stone tablet, the one linked to the secret society, was hidden deep in these woods. He hoped Elias would lead him there, hoping to find some answers. As the fog rolled in, the woods seemed to close in around them, the trees towering high above, their branches twisting like skeletal hands. Suddenly, Elias stopped. He turned to face the historian, his expression cold and unreadable. "You don't understand, do you?" Elias said, his voice low. "This town, it's not what it seems. And you, like everyone else, are part of it. You always have been." Before the historian could respond, Elias moved swiftly, his hand touching a large rock near the base of a tree. The ground beneath them rumbled, and a hidden door creaked open in the earth. The historian hesitated but knew he had no choice. He followed Elias into the darkened passage, his heart racing. What he was about to uncover could change everything. Chapter 12, Into the Depths. The passageway led deeper into the earth, the walls narrow and jagged as if they had been carved hastily by hands long gone. The air grew colder with each step, and the historian's breath became shallow. The sounds of the forest above had long since faded, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press in from all sides. Elias walked ahead with purpose, his silhouette a shadow against the dim torchlight flickering in the distance. The historian struggled to keep up, his mind racing with questions. What had Elias meant? "You're part of it," he had said. Part of what? And how was this underground passage connected to the disappearances, to the ancient artifact? Finally, they reached the end of the tunnel, which opened into a vast chamber. At its center was an altar, an ancient stone table, etched with strange symbols that seemed to pulse with an energy all their own. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay. The historian felt a cold sweat on his brow as he stepped into the chamber. Elias turned to face him, his expression now unreadable, but his eyes burned with a deep intensity. "It's time you understood everything," Elias said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "This town, this place is a nexus. A point of convergence for the forces that bind the world together. The artifact you seek is not just a stone, it's a key. A key to unlocking what's been hidden for centuries." The historian's mind raced. He had read about the artifact, about its connection to the lost society, the rituals, and the cycles. But he had never imagined anything like this. This was no ordinary piece of history. It was a part of something much older, something much darker than he could have ever imagined. "This is where it all began," Elias continued. "This is where the cycle is renewed. And you've been part of it all along. Your research, your questions, they've all led you here. To me." The historian's heart began to pound in his chest. He wasn't sure what Elias meant by part of it, but there was something in his voice that sent a chill down his spine. He had to know the truth. He had to understand what was happening in Harper's Ferry, before it was too late. "I don't understand," the historian said, his voice shaking. "What are you talking about? What is this place?" Elias stepped closer, his face illuminated by the flickering torches. "This is the heart of the cycle," he said softly. "The place where souls are transferred, where the ancient rituals are performed. The town of Harper's Ferry has been built upon this power. And now, it's time for you to take your place in the cycle." The historian felt a cold wave of terror wash over him. Was Elias suggesting that he, too, would disappear? That he would become a part of the cycle of replacement? "No," the historian said, his voice growing firm. "I won't be part of this. I won't let this town fall into darkness again." Elias smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was a smile that held something far darker, something that made the historian's blood run cold. "You don't have a choice," Elias said, his voice low. "None of us do." Chapter 13, The Revelation. Suddenly, the chamber began to tremble, and the air grew thick with an ominous energy. The historian felt a weight pressing down on him, as though the walls themselves were closing in. The altar began to glow, the symbols etched into its surface flickering with a strange light. Elias moved to the altar, his hand hovering over the surface, his fingers tracing the symbols. The historian stood frozen, unable to move, his mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. "It's time," Elias murmured. "The ritual must be completed. The cycle must continue." With a sudden, swift movement, Elias placed his hand fully on the altar. A pulse of light surged through the room, and the historian felt as if he were being pulled in every direction at once. The world seemed to spin, and the ground beneath him seemed to vanish. Then, everything went black. Chapter 14, The Awakening. The historian awoke in a dark, unfamiliar place. His head throbbed, and his body felt heavy, as though he had been lying still for hours or days. Slowly, he opened his eyes, blinking against the dim light. He was no longer in the chamber. The walls around him were smooth and white, cold to the touch. The air smelled sterile, devoid of the earthy scent of the forest. He tried to move, but his limbs felt stiff, unresponsive. Panic rose within him as he realized he was lying on a cold, metal table. The sensation of being trapped overwhelmed him, and his heart began to race. Was this part of the ritual? Had Elias done something to him? Before he could fully process his thoughts, the door to the room opened. A figure entered, cloaked in shadows. The historian strained his eyes, but he could barely make out the person's face. "Ah, you're awake," a voice said, low and calm. "You've been through quite an ordeal." The voice was familiar. Too familiar. It was Elias's voice. But there was something different about it. It was older, wiser, as though it had been spoken through the ages. "Where am I?" the historian demanded, his voice shaky. Elias stepped into the light, his face now clearly visible. But something was off. His eyes, those dark, piercing eyes, were the same, but there was an unfamiliar weariness to his features, as though he had lived through countless lifetimes. "You're in the next stage of the cycle," Elias replied. "You've crossed over. Welcome to the truth." The historian's breath caught in his throat. The next stage of the cycle? What was Elias talking about? "You've been chosen," Elias continued. "The ritual is complete. You're no longer just a part of the town's history, you're now part of its future." The historian's mind raced as he tried to comprehend the enormity of what was happening. He had crossed over? But how? Was he dead? Or had he become something else entirely? "I don't want this," the historian said, his voice cracking. "I don't want to be part of this cycle." Elias's face softened, just for a moment, but his eyes were still filled with a deep, haunting knowledge. "You don't get to choose," Elias said softly. "No one does. But in time, you'll understand. You'll see the truth, just as I have." The historian's heart sank. What had he become? What had he gotten himself into? And then, as if a veil had been lifted from his mind, he began to understand. He understood the cycle, the rituals, the disappearances, and the truth about Harper's Ferry. It wasn't just a town. It was a place of rebirth. A place where souls were transferred, and where the past and future collided in an endless loop. And now, he was a part of that loop whether he wanted to be or not. As the realization set in, the historian felt the weight of his fate pressing down on him. The cycle was never ending. And it had just claimed him. Epilogue: the eternal cycle. Harper's Ferry had always been a town of secrets. A place where the past lingered, and where the present was forever shaped by what had come before. But now, as the historian joined the ranks of those who had vanished, the cycle continued. The town's dark rituals would persist, as they always had, drawing new souls into their grasp. And somewhere, in the shadows of the woods, Raymond Miller's search for answers remained unfinished. He had never found the truth. But perhaps, in the end, he had become a part of it just like everyone else in Harper's Ferry. The town, it seemed, had a way of claiming its own. And so, the cycle began anew.